In the weekend from 23 till 25 of February, the German Bundesliga continues. A lot of strong grandmasters are participating, and I'm going to show you one brilliant attack from this team event, the strongest team championship in the world. We are going to have a look at a game of Nodirbek Abdusattorov, only 19 years old, but almost a top 10 player now. And he is playing against former number 2 in the world, Gata Kamsky. It's a very instructive attacking game with a lot of ideas you will find very useful. And I'm pretty sure you can apply it in some of your own games as well. So let's have a look what happens in this game. As it starts with the Sicilian defense, as I said, 1 e4. c5, knight f3, e6, and we go for the open variation. And after d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6 is played. So we get to see the Sicilian Taimanov variation, a very popular and reliable system for black. The queen goes to c7, bishop e3. That's a nice move, developing move, and it protects the knight. So after that you have a lot of ideas to decide where to go with your queen. Black goes for the move a6, so that white can never put a knight on b5 to annoy the queen. And it has also another idea, because very soon black will follow it up with the move b7, b5. White has a lot of different systems to choose from. You can play moves like queen d2 followed by castling, or you can also still decide to castle in the other direction by playing bishop e2 and castling kingside. It's a matter of taste. It's not like one system is better than the other. In any case, Abdusattorov played here the move bishop d3. So the bishop is nicely placed here, overprotecting the pawn. And who knows what the bishop can later do there. Here, Kamsky played the move b7, b5. And now there are ideas to put a bishop on b7 or to kick the knight away from c3. White says, I'm going to take the knight now on c6. This is a interesting moment, because white could have done it earlier, but in those cases when the pawn is still on b7, there's always the additional option for black to capture towards the center with a pawn from b7, and then it will be harder for white to challenge that part of the board. So here black takes back with the queen, and now Abdusattorov played the move queen to d2. So here it's clear that by playing this move he is ready to castle queenside. Bishop b7, castling queenside, and now the move b4 is played, chasing the knight away. And the knight doesn't have that many great squares, but can still go back to e2. Knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4 together with the queen and the bishop. So white protects it with the move f3. That's a useful move in a lot of Sicilian positions, not only with the idea to protect the pawn on e4, but later on, if you do get a chance, then probably white is going to launch the g-pawn. Bishop c5 is played, and black really would like to swap bishops here. Let's say if you do take on c5, then the queen is nicely placed in the center, controlling a lot of dark squares, and white's remaining bishop on d3 is not looking too great. But white is not obliged to cooperate with that exchange. Played here the move king to b1. And that's a very useful move, because the king will be a little bit more safe. And if black here decides to take on e3, which was not played in the game, then there is also an additional idea for white, which is very instructive. As after castling kingside, for instance, you would expect white to launch an attack with moves like g4, h4. A pawn storm will help white to open up the king side. But really strong here for white, and that's also one other idea behind this move king to b1, is to follow up here with the move rook c1. So the idea is not to play on the king side, but to play the move c3 and prove that the queen on c6 is quite vulnerable, because if the c file gets open, well, then the queen may just get in trouble. So here I think white is having a very nice position. But anyway, this was not played in the game, but it's very important to understand these subtleties why black doesn't go for the exchange of bishops at this point. Here the move d6 was played, and well, the king is still in the center. What is black going to do with its king in the next couple of moves? Well, let's have a look. White goes for the move h4, not g4, but h4. Also very interesting idea. So you're trying to launch your h-pawn, so to provoke some weaknesses. And here, for instance, if black which he didn't play in the game. But if he would go for castling kingside, there's one very cool idea I want to show you. This is something you will never forget, as the move bishop h6 can be played here. And this is incredibly strong because the threat is also just to get the queen involved, or just to take on g7 first and then queen g5. And if you would take the bishop, there is queen takes h6, attacking the knight. If the knight goes away, well, then the rook comes over to h3 with a threat to go to g3, threatening checkmate on g7. While there's also the plan of playing e5 when the bishop hits the pawn on h7. You see that white just can get a crushing attack if black is not alert. So castling kingside is very dangerous. Okay, you don't have to take the bishop. You may go back with a knight to e8, but that's not a great place for the knight. It obstructs the rooks, and white can continue with ideas like rook h3. When the rook will come to g3, it's a really strong attacking idea. Keep that in mind. So back to the game. After the move h4, black decided to go back with a knight to d7. White played the move h5. So h6 is an idea to weaken the dark squares. And black says, okay, I want to stop that pawn. I play the move h6. But now the pawn is really annoying. It puts a lot of pressure on that side. And castling kingside is never really attractive because there are always potential sacrifices on h6. So black is now kind of stuck with a king in the center, but how to approach the king? Do you continue with your attack on that side of the board? Well, Abdusattorov says, well, I want to open up the other side of the board with the move c3, so making it also harder for black to evacuate a king to the other side if he was considering to do so. Now c3 is a very interesting positional move, but I think objectively it should still be okay for black if he just takes everything. Let's say you take on c3, knight takes c3, you can swap the bishops and then also try to exchange the queens. If that happens in most Sicilian queenless middle games, black is usually doing pretty okay because the king is still in the center. You have an extra central pawn. Here, I think white is maybe still a tad better, but anything to play for still. But it's a sharp position, and well, black decided differently, played here the move a5. Now white is never really going to take on b4, because then after a takes b4, this rook from a8 will start hitting the white queen side. So here, another idea of the move c3 is to put the knight on d4, attacking the queen. And well, black never really wants to take with the bishop, because then you get a beautiful pawn center and the white king is safe. You have the bishop pair. This is everything what white could have wished for. So the queen goes to b6, but now the bishop comes into b5. This is a really good move, and white is taking advantage of the fact that the pawn is on a5. Here, you cannot win a piece by taking on d4 with the idea to take on b5, because there's intermediate move bishop takes d7, and after taking with the king, there is bishop takes d4. The king is stuck in the center, but also the queen and the pawn on g7 are under attack. So here you see the knight is in trouble, therefore rook d8 is played. And white is combining threats on both sides of the board, because now the move rook h3 is played. And well, the rook is on its way to g3. For instance, if you would castle here, rook g3 is just totally crushing already with huge threats against the pawn on g7. If you try to get out of that g file, because white was threatening bishop takes h6, let's say king h7, now brilliant shot here. Bishop takes d7, rook takes d7, and now rook sacrifice. Rook takes g7. If you take with the rook, it's bishop takes h6. And now you understand why the bishop took on d7, because the rooks are no longer connected. If you go away with the king, it's just bishop takes f8, and white is going to win because of the threat queen h6, queen g7. While if you go back with the king to g8 to keep that rook defended, well, there's this move queen to g5. And after king h7, it's queen to g7 with checkmate. So, black is in trouble here. Decided to take on c3. White takes back with the queen. And, well, there are different options. But you see that now the diagonal for the queen is open. And you're indirectly looking at that pawn on g7. How should black deal with it? Well, probably the best way of playing here is e5. So that you're attacking the knight. If the knight goes away, the bishop is hanging. So this didn't happen in the game, but I think that black should have gone for it. For instance, after bishop takes d7, rook takes d7, you put a knight on f5. You're threatening to take, and after exchanging on e3, let's say you take with the queen, you get such an endgame in which white is a bit better because of the pawn weaknesses on d6 and a5. You have ideas to go knight c4. Black is still fighting here and has relatively good drawing chances still, but it's not a pleasant position for black at all. Instead, Kamsky decided now to put the king in the center. So what is his idea? To get out of that pin. So now bishop takes d4 is a huge threat, after which the bishop on b5 is no longer defended by the knight. So what is the next move by white? a4. Very nice move. It's not a weakening of your queen side. You're just strengthen your bishop on b5. It's a great square for that piece. Knight e5 was played. Rook g3, attacking the pawn on g7. Rook h g8, and here we get to one of the critical moments in the game. It's not an easy position at all to understand, but what white wants to do is eventually break through in the center. The move you would love to play here is f4 to attack the knight on e5 and then look for opportunities to break either with e5 or maybe f5. But the problem is there's bishop takes e4 with check. So the king is not well placed, and that explains the move by Abdusattorov. Instead of playing the move f4, he just goes away with the king to a1. Interesting. Maybe king a2. It's also another idea. Difficult to say which square is better for the king. King a1 played, and it seems like black is having everything under control. The rook goes to the c file, has done its job on d8. Now it looks at the queen on c3, and white played this move, f4. Nice attacking idea to hit the knight on e5. And where is the knight going? Well, the knight didn't go away, because look what happened here at this point. Kamsky played the move bishop takes d4, probably expecting that white's queen is under attack by both the bishop and the rook, that white would take back with the queen on d4 and try to defend a somewhat inferior endgame. Well, that's something Kamsky has been doing many times in his career, so it's a very understandable move. But look at this. After bishop takes d4, white doesn't take back with the queen, but instead there is bishop takes d4. So he hits the queen on b6. The queen is in trouble. Now after rook takes c3, look at this, rook takes c3. Now you can take on b6, but then the rook on g3 is hanging and things are far from clear. Maybe white can take on e5, but it's a total mess. Let's go back. After rook takes c3, this is the spectacular moment of the game, as white doesn't capture the queen on b6, but just takes back with the rook on c3. How crazy is that? So you have a position in which white has sacrificed the queen. It has only a rook for it, but the queen is under an attack. The queen has only one square to go to. If it goes to d8, well, then you take on e5 and black is deadly lost here. So what is happening? If you do take the pawn on e5, there's bishop c5 with a discovered check. You're winning the queen back and you will emerge with an extra bishop. So that is not possible. If you play anything else, let's say you do take the pawn on e4, for instance, then white has a huge choice here. He can even just play the move rook d to c1, threatening rook c7. And if the king got to go back to f8, then you have rook c8 with skewer winning the queen. After d takes e5, now bishop takes e5, still the king can't go away. And if you try to hit this bishop with f6, rook c7 for instance, king f8, rook c8, this is the exact line I was thinking about. And here white is just going to win the queen back and will be a piece up in the end. So remarkable tactics, and well, black is just completely lost. After this move rook takes c3, Kamsky resigned. That was shocking. I mean, it was such a sharp game, and probably both players had expected the game to last much longer. Let's go back to this critical moment after f4, because bishop takes d4 is the decisive mistake. What could black have done? Well, if you play a move like knight d7, which is also not good, it runs into e5, and you're trying to open up the d file and prove that there are some huge weaknesses. For instance, if you do take on e5, well, there's knight f5 with a discovered check. You're ready to take on d7. For instance, pawn takes, and now rook takes d7 check, king goes to f8, and now after queen takes e5, it's once again totally crushing. This rook is badly placed, there are all sorts of mating threats. Black can never really take on e3 because of checkmate on e7, while, for instance, if you do play f6 to hit the queen, it's bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, and now the key move here is this move, rook to d8, deflecting the rook from defending both the king and the queen. Rook takes, and then queen takes c5, game over. So, spectacular idea. But you still want to know, and everybody wants to know, what black should have done. Well, apparently, this move, knight c6, is the best move. Now, the big difference with the knight being on d7 or c6 is that you hit this knight on d4. Now, the idea with e5 is no longer good because of knight takes d4. Everything can get swapped. The queens can come off the board. You can give a check on c1, king a2, bishop d5. And it's actually black who's having the initiative in this endgame. So e5 is not good. What should white do instead? If you just exchange on c6, it's also not looking great because, well, probably queens will come off the board as well. And, well, the closer we get to an endgame, the better black's position will get. So that's also not good. But I was thinking that Kamsky must have seen this idea of knight c6. But he didn't go for it because of knight f5. This is such a tricky move because you're attacking the king. You're threatening to take even on g7. So you force black to take on f5. But here after e5, it looks as if white is having a crushing attack once again. Because if you do take the pawn, it's bishop takes c5. You're winning the queen. This is really strong. And if you instead think like, okay, let's take first that bishop, then there's pawn takes d6. And if you go away with the king, well, rook takes e3. You're piece down. You have one fantastic pawn for it. But most importantly, that rook on g8 is out of place. So I think even here, white is just completely winning. However, the critical line, and this is difficult to see, brilliant defensive idea pointed out by the engines, is to move the knight away from c6 to b4, so that the rook, the c file, is open now. The rook looks at the queen. Now after pawn takes d6, look at this insane idea. You sacrifice the queen here. Queen takes d6, so that after rook takes d6, you take back with the bishop, and you do have one knight and a rook for the queen. It looks as if the black king is open, but it's almost impossible to get to the black king. You're hitting this rook, this queen on c3 with your rook. If the queen goes away, the bishop comes to e4, and look at this. Black is taking over the initiative now with the bishop, knight on b4, and the rook on c8. And the minor pieces are so good because they can count on the support of the minor pieces. So the files towards the black king, they are closed, and white got to be very careful now. Let's say at least you can play knight c2, and after king a2, knight b4, you can go back. It's a repetition of moves. If you go back with the king to a1, but if you go with the king to b3, for instance, well, there is bishop to d5, king a3, and knight c2 is a spectacular mate. So you see also that white's king is also not entirely safe. Well, this all didn't happen, but I thought these ideas, these general ideas, plus all the concrete lines, they are very instructive. Please let me know in the comments what you think of this game. And if you really like this video, just make sure to subscribe to the channel. You make me a big favor with that, and I promise to cover many more exciting games in the next couple of videos. So stay tuned.